We live, Norm.
You are live.
Amazing, everybody. Thanks and welcome for joining us here today. We're super excited to be bringing you the state of the market. It is brought to you today by Camrost Felcorp. And we wanted to do this because there's always a lot of different information on the market. And not everything's the same, and some of it's very skewed. So we wanted to put together an incredible panel of experts who are in this current market and operate in the pre-construction side of business to give you our side of it. And as well, we brought in an economist from the Royal Bank, Mr. Robert Hugh. Also joining us on the panel, Christopher Castellano, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Camrost Felcorp, and Louis Nugent from Pivot Real Estate. So gentlemen, thank you, and thank you for joining us. And why don't we jump right in and start talking about the market and what we're seeing.
Sounds fantastic. So the first thing I think we're going to talk about today has to do with the Canadian mortgage market, the stress test, and I guess Robert, will kick it over to you. The big question a lot of people have with interest rates going the direction they are is the Canadian market going to experience what the US experienced all those years ago? The stress test was very controversial when it came in. Where does that leave us in today's world?
Do we have a crash?
Right. And it's amazing to be talking about like a crash right now, whereas just only like 6 months ago, it was the complete opposite, how crazy the market is, how strong it is. And really, the short answer is no, we don't think a kind of a US style crash is on the way. The situation in Canada is very different relative to where it was in US in 07, 08, 09, 010, and all the way to 11. But clearly the market has cooled, and we're probably going to stay pretty quiet over the next few months. This very sharp rise in interest rate that we've seen since the month of March is still having an effect on the demand side. Buyers still have not entirely adjusted to the increase to date, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a minute. But the Bank of Canada is not done yet. Our view is going to keep on going over the next couple months, such that will be more to adjust to for the market. So, will that lead to a crash? No. Will that lead to a significant correction? Yes, I think we're pretty much in the middle of it. But it's going to take some more time to adjust to it. So clearly, it's been a tremendous few months in the Canadian housing market, particularly here in the Toronto and Southern Ontario, for that matter. That was clearly overheating earlier this year, and then now is that on the other side of that mountain.
Yeah, but I think it's also important for markets like ours to kind of hit these plateaus. Right? It's healthy for the market to not just keep increasing month over month. And I think with something like the stress test that was introduced to the market,
right,
that allows us sort of the security of knowing that even with rates going the way they are today, Canadians still have the ability to pay.
Right. And it's exactly, and I've mentioned the situation is very different here in Canada relative to the US, and part of it has to do with the stress test. Back in 07 and 2017, when the word of a stress test was first uttered, and it created a lot of discomfort on many parts of the industry. But really, the stress test was designed for a situation like this one. You got a sharp rise in interest rates, and you want your borrowers to be able to cope with that increase. And this is what the stress test, what part of the controversy was that qualifying for a full 2 percentage point above your rate, or client rate, is huge. But looking back over the last few months, you realize, that was actually pretty clever, given the starting point. Now, I think the whole conversation soon enough will shift towards, now that we're up this high in terms of interest rate, should the stress test be maintained at 2 percentage point above the current level of interest rate? And I think that's probably a conversation for maybe 6 months from now.
And now, do we feel that it's sort of a comfort level that's causing a lot of what we're seeing? So if the stress test has proven that Canadians are able to handle mortgage rates and interest rates the way they are, is it just sort of this feeling of the consumer that they have to become accustomed to the interest rates as they exist today? Like, I think the low rates we saw in,
right,
over the past 2 years are gone. They
are gone. although I suspect that it may not be gone in the memory necessarily of many out there in the market. I'm sure both on the supply side and demand side still wish to see sub 2% for a 5-year fixed rate, for example, right? So I think time will be of the essence there. I think it will sink in. Look, these were very exceptional circumstances that led to exceptionally low interest rate. These are behind us. Going forward, we're looking at a higher plane. But anytime I speak to an audience and there's always somebody raising his hands that I remember back in 1980 when interest rates were and the mortgage rates were 18-20%. We're not there yet. We're not. I'm not going to say yet. No, we're not there. We probably won't be there. So clearly, even though interest rates and mortgage rates have risen quite a bit, I would not necessarily qualify today's as being exceptionally high or very problematic. It's just that now we've gone to something within a band that will become the new normal. Sub 2% 5-year rates were exceptional, and we're probably not going to see this soon. I may be wrong.
So the market is going through the adjustment, and I think we've seen the adjustment on demand side as well as on supply side. But I think fundamentally, in like the GTA market for housing, are we experiencing a housing supply issue?
Well, there was a supply issue before the pandemic. There was a definite housing supply issue during the pandemic, at a time when demand was on steroids, right? When you have exceptionally low mortgage rate, it really boosts your demand for housing. But now, still, when you look at the demographics, particularly when you look at immigration, that we're just starting a new kind of historical immigration wave in Canada that will particularly affect the GTA. So demand for housing, whether it's rental or ownership, will continue to increase, and then soon enough. Now, right now, demand supply are in better balance, and maybe we're getting to more of a buyer's market, but that's more the cyclical part of it. From a structural point of view, you'll have the supply being really challenged by very strong demand. So the housing stock needs to grow, and will have to grow over the coming years and decades, I would argue.
I think the conversation around housing stock is pertinent today because already, like you talked about, we were in all these instances of having a supply shortage. But when you look at even the new numbers that StatsCan released, I believe this morning, they're now calling in a medium growth scenario where an additional 6 million people are going to move to Ontario. The lion's share of that, they're saying, is going to be to the GTA. So that's going to put an even larger constraint on what we already have, and that's over the next 20 years, right? That's not a huge that's not a huge outlook. That's a massive number in a pretty short time. So already we're lagging, and it's just going to be exacerbated into the future with more people coming into this province.
Yeah, and we know like housing supply has been under stress for a long time, and that we have not been able to keep up. The government imposes a lot of restrictions on us. In the labor market, we just don't have the labor to be able to build these houses.
I think labor is something very interesting in this scenario because it's not simply a situation where, obviously the government has a lot of rules and regulations in place, and multiple politicians keep talking about how they're going to make it easier and faster and swifter, and we're still waiting for all that to happen. But even if everything were to open up today and we could just, the industry could just build no hold bars, there's just such a shortage of labor to construct. So when you hear about 10,000 units getting pushed, or when you hear about us lacking supply, it's not even a question of can we just open it up and build. We don't have the physical labor force to build, right? You look at what's happened to construction prices over the past couple of years. Massive increase, and that's simple supply and demand, right? There's just not enough labor to build or for us to get where we need to get. So it's going to be a huge constraint moving forward.
Right, and this should be part of the solution. And in fact, to be fair to governments, there with trade and training and everything, there are some efforts being put in there, but that will be key for the future for exactly what you're talking about, to ensure that we are as a society training enough of those workers, whether they're skilled trades or even just like journeymen or journey persons. and because that issue is like we mentioned is nothing new, and it's likely to potentially even get worse. So that has to be part of the solution.
And also part of government, a lot of effort trying to deal with the affordability issues, but also we have seen the actual action from the government side with the increasing in the development charges, introducing inclusion in zoning. So what's your view on on one side we're trying to battle affordability, but on the other side we haven't done anything to reduce the cost of the whole situation?
Well, anything concrete. I mean, there's been a lot of initiatives, but at the end of the day, they have not done much to improve affordability. And then we'll see with some of the measures then the federal government has put forward, and also the provincial government have put forward. They might at the margin do a little bit to help, but really, I apologize ahead of time. My opinion is not overly optimistic, but I'm not overly optimistic with respect to affordability, especially in the GTA. Simply because the forces at play, especially demographics being so massive, as you point out, that it's a huge challenge. And when you look at other major global cities around the world, same issues.
Right.
Affordability is overstretched. It's very hard. You look at the social problems also associated with unaffordability are massive. So this is part of the lot, unfortunately, of Toronto and the GTA being one of those global cities. And so not to say that nothing should be done. I would argue a lot can be done. But part of I think what can be more, let's put it, relatively easily done is more on the rental side. If you're trying to address the ownership costs, I think that's a really tough nut to crack, because I don't see it anywhere else in the world. A global city, a bungalow or a single detached home, global city being affordable. I don't think it is, but I think on the rental side that can be achieved.
And about the rental market, I think that is one of the probably easiest indicator of the supply issue. I think, what have you seen in the past 3 months with the rental market? I mean, we're seeing some crazy numbers out there.
I think the rental market at the end of the day is the purest indicator of what's going on in a market, because there's very little speculation when an individual goes to rent a place. And obviously interest rates have played into it, supply has played into it. All these people now moving back into the urban cores because of things like universities now opening up their doors, businesses going back to a staggered work day where you're 3-4 days in the office, 3-4 days at home. I think now you're seeing, the latest numbers is that we're back to above the pre-pandemic levels. And to me, that goes to show that there is a fundamental issue in the housing market, that it'll just keep getting more and more expensive, because that is the purest form, and there's just a lack of rentals out there.
Right, and over and above that is the phenomenon relatively recent of this short-term rentals, right? Like those hotels, basically the Airbnb and stuff that maybe 15 or 20 years ago was not to the same degree, anywhere to the same degree as today. So those are units, really hotels, that are taking away the supply, rental supply, the much needed rental supply. So I think all those factors are making for a very tough, I guess, set of the challenges for those.
Over the projection, if you were to say, is this going to get worse as the rental numbers going to keep climbing, because based on the absorption rate out there, we don't see an end of it right now?
But I think they have to, right? Rental rates have to keep going up. We've talked about issues of supply. We've talked about people moving back into these cores. Really, at the end of the day, how can you say rental rates are going to level off without some sort of foreign, or I shouldn't say foreign, some sort of external factor coming onto the rental market?
Right. And especially if you look at, from an economist's point of view, is that your marginal increase in your rental stock. So basically, those units you're adding to the rental stock, they come at a very high price because of those construction. I mean, talk to any developer, they will quickly tell you that those units are expensive. Even if you go cheap, they are expensive, but probably higher than those in the existing market. So that is, even though we need to build more, that's part of that challenge. So those construction costs, So I think ultimately to get something that's more affordable, I think there has to be some form of aid, subsidies, you name it, to lower development charges, for example, for purpose-built rentals, or those sorts of solutions.
Right. Because the way I look at it, when you start talking about the government's sort of interaction with getting new supply onto the market, if we look at where development charges were about 10 years ago to where they are today, it went from approximately 5,000, just over 5,000, to with the new proposed regime to just over 80,000, and that's in a 10-year span, right? That hits affordability directly with things like Louis was mentioning, the inclusionary zoning, that affects the rest of the building's affordability directly. I think when you take all those factors and you couple it with the simple questions of, do we think land's ever going to get cheaper in a city like the GTA or any major metropolitan area, be it Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary? No, land will never get cheaper. Are taxes ever going to go down? Not really. Are trade costs ever going to go down? Not really. So that leads you to believe that when you separate out pre-construction versus, let's call it resale or existing housing supply, pre-construction will never truly go down in price. It can't, because all the factors that go into constructing it will only ever rise in the future, unless a government body comes in and starts heavily incentivizing it.
Or perhaps some kind of economic calamity, which is not necessarily something, but which we should not necessarily dismiss. When you look at those major kind of corrections in the past, they were associated with or caused by major recession and sometimes like dramatic, think the U.S. 08, 09, right? A crisis, some form of crisis, which is obviously not something that we wish for, but it could be sort of the silver lining of those events is that, look at the U.S. I mean, the affordability in the U.S. improved in post-great global financial crisis. And so even though things have gotten worse over the last a few years, they're still not tracking as worse as Canada is. So I agree 98% of what you said. just that tight bit of tidbit of maybe a disagreement is that is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Probably not in something in an economic event that would be disruptive, not just for well beyond the housing market. It would have tremendous social consequences.
Okay. There's a lot of questions that are starting to come into the chat, and we are going to deal with the chat at the end. Robert's not going to be with us for the entire segment.
Sure.
And what I'd like to do is there's a couple questions here that I'd like to throw before Robert leaves.
Okay,
one of them, which is interesting, which has come up before, but we never really deal with it from a banking side of it. In the U.S., you can lock in your term for the entire amortization. You can have a 25-year, 30-year term. Do you ever see the Canadians doing something like that?
For 25 years? I think our market has been historically, not traditionally, more of a 5-year kind of term, and that's why we've got the vast majority of mortgage terms are 5 years. We've seen there are some that potentially can be less, up to down to the 1 year, and then some at some point there was a bit of a push to get longer, like maybe 7-10 years to be a bit more common. But there's a lot of history behind that, and also in the kind of in terms of sources of funding for financial institutions are part of that 5-year term. I don't see that changing really in Canada. In other words, moving towards the U.S. very long-term kind of terms. I would argue that our system served Canada well over time. It provides financial institutions some safety, and also the consumers as well. If you're locked in a certain, every 5 years you get a chance to start fresh.
Yeah.
Well, it allows them much more flexibility at the end of the day, right? Because after that term expires, they can choose what they want to do, where they want to go, if they want to switch properties, sell it. I think it's a level of flexibility that helps our population, truthfully.
Yeah. And that also brings one of the last kind of questions that we're hearing different things right now, which is that target rate. Can you shed a little bit of light on what that
The target, as in the Bank of Canada's overnight rate? Or?
Trigger rate.
The trigger rate.
The
trigger rate.
Trigger rates is a big topic these days.
Right. And just in short, the trigger rates is for those who have a variable rate mortgage, and it's historically it's never been really an issue because not all financial institutions, but most financial institutions, you have a variable rate and yet you still pay fixed payments every month. When the interest rates vary, it's just a mix of principal and interest that change. Except that when you have very massive movements in interest rate, like what we've seen over the last few months, is that now you may end up, some borrowers may end up having spending their entire monthly payments to pay back interest. And once you exceed that, then financial institutions would kind of step in and say, well, okay, we need to increase your payments.
You need a top up or something.
To address that situation. And this is what the trigger rate is that at some point you cross a certain line and people have to address it.
But I think that's the beauty of the stress test, right? Because the stress test addresses this exact situation where people are now, potentially in an instance where they have to start adding more money into it, lump sum, monthly increases, top-ups, whatever it may be. By having that stress test, we know that the banks, the financial institutions, have pre-qualified those people to go over and above the rate they currently received.
Right.
So in terms of what the trigger rate is going to have effect on the market, it should be pretty minimal if all the financial institutions did the proper due diligence when implementing or granting these rates to individuals.
Okay, and I agree with that. And we're going to move on to the second part of our program. I really want to thank Robert for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure talking to you guys.
Yeah, and you're more than welcome to stick around, or I know your schedule is exceptionally busy. But again, thank you, Robert. And again, any chat questions we will deal with at the very end as well.
Perfect. So what we're going to focus on right now is a bit about EXS and Camrost in general. So, Louis, if you want to talk a bit.
Well, first off, let's start with the developer behind the project, and I think there's no better man than you. I've heard that
once or twice. You've probably heard the speech a bunch of times, and I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the things we talked about play into what we'll be discussing with EXS and the opportunities we have there. So first off, Camrost, we've been a builder now for over 45 years in the GTA. We've delivered, over 80 buildings. I think this is my favorite slide or my favorite thing to talk about because, the proof is in the pudding at the end of the day. We've built countless amounts of residential units, countless amounts of commercial units.
Never canceled.
Never canceled a project, always delivered, and we've always found, ways to ensure that the projects move forward. And now by having Camcorp Construction, our own in-house construction company, we ensure that quality, timelines, and costs are always kept on pace. So before we hop into EXS, I think it's very important we talk a bit about the Exchange District in total and overall city center.
Yeah, this square one. I think city center, it's just started to grow. What we're seeing right now on Square One is nothing compared to what's about to come. I think we look up through the city website, what was it, 50, 60 buildings at minimum that's coming to the downtown Mississauga?
Exactly. I think it's incredible. First of all, Mississauga did a great job at building infrastructure and a plan to create this downtown 2020, their downtown 2020 vision that Camrost was at the leading edge of when we launched Exchange District and what we're doing with Exchange District. But you've seen over the past couple of years, countless other developers follow our queue, come in with huge projects, both commercial and residential. And I think when you look at this area 10, 20, 30 years in the future, it's no longer going to be a regional mall. It's going to be an actual downtown core.
It's a city.
It's going to be a city unto itself. And what's great about Exchange District and EXS is really you're in the Yorkville portion of it. You are in the center ice downtown core of this area. And that's really where everyone wants to be at the end.
And then to add to that, I think because of that growth, because of how the Square One downtown Mississauga is changing, it's creating a need for a luxury project. It's creating a need for that destination address where if you're on the other side of Bush Street, you're completely different. You're on this side of Bush Street, you're different, right? So that is the analogy that we've used in the past. But I think Mississauga really lacking that true luxury building, which is, I think, the vision that Camrost is doing here.
But Ellie, like you've been around for a long, long time, and I think
Okay.
long time. I think when you look at downtown cores and how they've evolved over time, the big steps and leaps and bounds has come when luxury has been introduced to that area.
Yeah.
Why is Yorkville such a hub? Because of all the luxury stores that moved there. Once the luxury stores were there, luxury residences came in, luxury hotels came in, and it created this node. When you look at other parts of the city, it's the same thing, right? You start having a little bit of development, then boom, something luxurious comes in, and that changes the trajectory completely as to what is going to be in that hub. So talking about Exchange District, it's a 4-building master plan community, right? Award-winning master plan community, as we love to say. The first 3 buildings we launched sold out almost 1,500 units in record time. And now we have the last one, sort of the most luxurious service-oriented offering in the building, EXS, which is now under construction. What's incredible about EXS is that it offers this opportunity where you can take possession of the unit within 24 months, right? That's something you typically can't find anywhere else in the market.
It's going to get better later in the program that we're going to talk about. So.
Exactly. And it's it's currently under construction. We'll talk about that in a tiny bit. But what makes EXS so interesting is it's more than just a residence. It's more than us just slapping the luxury name on it. It's the services we're offering in it, right?
This district that we created.
Yeah. And in EXS, in the Exchange District alone, you've got incredible retailers that are coming in. You've got incredible, an incredible boutique hotel that's coming in. You've got incredible amenities. So if we talk just about the retailers for a bit, having operators like Biblos, Edo, and Zaza in the development is huge, right?
And last time I think I was at the office, you told me about Biblos, this flagship restaurant. What is that retrofit?
It's going to be a multi-million dollar expansion. And when you look at specifically Biblos, we'll talk about them for a minute, right? They're in Dubai, they're in Miami, they're in Toronto, and now they're going to be in Mississauga. So not only is it great for us, as a developer and for our district, but I think that goes to show you Mississauga and how people believe in Mississauga. Mississauga at the end of the day is such a hub. And Louis, we were just talking, you were saying Mississauga rental rates are outperforming Toronto rental rates.
Yeah, first time when we look at the last quarter and we compare it in the last few years, this is the first time that the 1-bedroom rent, I think it's like $10 above Toronto, but that's never happened before. If you go back to 5 years ago, I think the gap was more like 20-30%.
It was about 20-30%, yeah.
And now the gap keep closing every single year, and like right now, it is higher on average.
So what do you think? Why is Mississauga?
People want to live where they're working as well. Like Mississauga didn't have that amenity before. Now you've got these great restaurants, great art scene, you've got education, and you're closer to work. So why be in the city? You've got everything right there.
Yeah, and sort of piggybacking off that, there's the office component at Exchange District. So we've got about 60,000 square feet of office space that's going to be in Exchange District. On top of that, when you look at Mississauga as an employment hub, you find a massive amount of Fortune 500 companies. I think it's like over 70 or 80 Fortune 500 companies have their regional head office in Mississauga. We've got the highest concentration of Japanese head offices outside of Japan is in Mississauga. And job forecasts have Mississauga having over 500,000 jobs by 2031. So what that means both for our project for this district is that that's a huge demand that needs to be satiated in this area.
So with all that growth and with basically how different Exchange District is, having all this component, basically it's telling you this is the final chance, get in.
This is definitely the final chance. And for EXS, the big thing we talk about is this 24-month closing and the progress. So if you were to go by the site today, you can see it's well under construction, moving very well. And another important thing to discuss is our belief, Camrost's belief in the Mississauga market and in Square One, that we're going to have the Southlands, which are going to come out in a little bit. Yeah, we want to do it again. So good, we're going to do it again. And that's really to ensure that we have carved out this incredible node in the downtown core to call the Exchange District and bring luxury and incredible buildings there. So with the final opportunity at EXS, we've got the boutique hotel, we've got incredible finishes that are going into it, the 26 boutique rooms, and then throughout the building, you've got Miele appliances, Kohler, Trevisana, and Latch, really top tier stuff. But that's not enough. We wanted to, based on our conversation that we just had with Robert and what we're seeing in the market today, we wanted to put together a very strong program for people.
Yeah, I think we have a truly great program. Starting out by the deposit, we'll save the best for last.
Right.
I think so we only requiring $90,000 deposit within basically 18 months for any unit in the building.
Yep, any unit in the building. So regardless if it's a 1-bedroom, 1+10, 2-bedroom, any kind of unit, it's $90,000 total.
In some cases, below 10% deposit?
Yeah, in some cases it's quite appealing. In some cases, I'm not gonna agree to any specific numbers, but I think when you look at it, and we talk to consumers in the market today, and we talk to people like Robert, the economist, and we see what the pain points are. There's really two pain points. One is, well, how can I get into this in an efficacious and approachable way? How can I make this affordable for me? And then the second is with regards to interest rates, and we'll get to interest rates in a moment. But for us, a builder like Camrost, for this building already to be under construction, this is really an incredible incentive to get people into the marquee building in Exchange District, right? This is the one with the boutique hotel. Mm-hmm. This is the one that's going to have the hotel services with residents being able to opt in for turn down service, housekeeping, room service, all of those incredible services that you would typically find in a hotel residence in downtown Toronto, you're now able to find in Mississauga.
And let's talk about our closing date. I think, based on what we just discussed right now, so we know the rental market is strong, and we know the rental market, it's not going to go away. There's no immediate solution to all of it.
Right.
So this number is going to keep going. So in a way, a sooner closing for you to start collecting the rent early can be more beneficial. We understand there's a high interest rate and there's a monthly carrying cost, but I think in our next slide, we're going to address all of that.
Right, and I think, to what Robert was saying earlier, there is going to be a point where the rates plateau, and sort of the Bank of Canada has taken what they want to take. I think as interest rates continue to increase, rental rates will only continue to increase. As supply continues to be diminished because of people deciding to push launches, or the constraints around government approval timelines, the constraints around workers, it's only going to get worse, right? If we look at the universities, you have kids, they're going back to school now, right? Everyone's going back. I was driving on the 401 this weekend, and the amount of cars with out-of-province license plates I saw, Quebec, Alberta, Manitoba, with the trunks just jam-packed, right? The SUVs you can see through the back, you see them just jam-packed with stuff driving towards Toronto. It's like, oh wow, everyone's coming back to the city. And so for hubs like Toronto, hubs like Mississauga, places like Vancouver, Montreal, big Canadian cities, affordability on rental rates is only going to continue to erode in the future. But in terms of purchase rates, we're offering an incredible 3.5% mortgage, up to 3.5% mortgage interest rate buy down.
So
now,
if my rate is 5%, we will take it down to 1.5.
Exactly, and this is to really help people for those first 3 years buffer against the uncertainty around mortgage rates, right? When we talk to a lot of people, their secondary concern, like I mentioned, is interest rates.
And the cash flow.
And the cash flow, right? So we'll let you talk about cash flow in a moment, but I think it's important to understand with the interest rate buy down, it's to really take that concern out of the equation. So with an interest rate buy down, if rates are at 5%, like the example you just used, you're now at 1.5%, which is better, almost better than any rate you could have gotten in the last 2 years. So to Robert's point of people who are wishing for the rates to come back, you now have that opportunity.
We
right?
just turn the clock back.
We're turning the clock back, and it really gives you 5 years of worry-free sort of living and investing in this.
It's basically 2 years until the final closing. We only require 90,000. Then you get your mortgage, you close it. Then it's another 3 years of basically worry-free living. You just, when's the last time when you remember where put the 20% down and forget about the property? That was like 5-7 years ago.
Yeah, correct.
Right? So now we're turning back the clock. Now it's actually the case where you put 20% down, you close your property. Now you only need 90,000.
Right.
But essentially by final closing, that's what you're doing. Then you rent it out, and that's it. Then you forget about it. And in 2027, I saw your next 4 buildings. They're going to be cheaper than the ones today? I don't think so, right?
Probably not, no.
Probably not. So, so how does that mortgage, well, before we get into that, so rental numbers in Mississauga are very, very strong, right?
Right.
So we just pulled the last week rentals, just some examples on the screen here. This is the numbers for one bedroom. This is not 1 plus den. This is just pure one bed. So we look at it.
I can't stress enough how crazy the rental market
Yes.
is today, right?
Yeah.
The news just came out that rental prices since the start of the year have increased. I think it's like $500 on average, right?
Yeah.
And if you take that over the span of a whole year, $500 a month, that's what, $6,000. $6,000 extra that individuals are spending now on rent. And truthfully, rates is just going to keep going up. Like,
Yeah, and,
So-
and on the screen you can see here, I mean, we've seen like multiple listings at 25, 2600. We even seen one at 2700.
Yep.
This is a pure one bed, not 1 plus den. And then we
Right.
look at the 2 bedrooms, you will be anywhere between 3150 to 3400. And I think that number is going to keep growing.
And I think when we look at nodes, so we're creating a city center is being created in downtown Mississauga, right? With the Exchange District and with everything that's going on in that city center node. Now, when you look at these buildings and you compare them to what Exchange District is going to be, it's the equivalent of like looking at, Canary District versus Distillery District, right? It's the equivalent of looking at like Parkdale versus Liberty Village, Bloor versus Yorkville. When you're in that central part of the node, the rates are always higher because the desirability is that much higher. So not only do you have the location factor that's going to be a huge benefit to individuals in this, but with EXS you have that unique product factor.
It's a different product. It's a different product.
And different product is the product that sells super well. So let's run through this a little bit, Louis.
Yeah. So basically, this is the scenario of our 1 bedroom. I think our starting price was $844,000. So we just run it at 5% interest rate, which is actually higher than the fixed rate that you see on the market
Current
today.
today, yeah.
So we don't need to bake in like the worst scenario. Then we start running, your monthly mortgage payment, maintenance fees. We base off the price list. Taxes, we just estimate them based on what we've seen on this around the city.
It's based on the mill rate, yeah.
Yeah, and then we just add a little bit more. Then we're using the today rental numbers. I used $2,700 in there. So we're not even using the numbers 2 years from now. We're not even bake in like the fact that EXS probably going to rent at a higher premium. And with the mortgage buy down program, so basically how the program works is we use a mortgage calculator. We work out to be what is 3.5% of the rate, and then we'll give it as a lump sum payment to the buyer after closing as a check for the full amount. So how they use the amount is, and our scenario is if you take that amount, you split it over 36 months, apply to your monthly payment, then that's the number that we came with, which is $423 positive cash flow. And, those are the stats out on the screen there, which is, you're basically saving $92,000 in interest in this 2-bedroom situation. Yeah. You're going to collect $122,000 in rent based on our estimation.
Right.
And you're going to have a positive cash flow. So, given this number, it's almost better to just close earlier and start collecting this rent.
I think this is an opportunity that people won't, necessarily see a ton of in the future. Having the ability to purchase today, close in 2 years, and have positive cash flow on day one because of the deposit structure and the interest rates that we're running with today.
I think this program is amazing. I mean, it took care of all of the uncertainty in the buyer's mind. It is. And we leave you as a buffer. I mean, $300-400 positive cash flow. I mean, maintenance fees go up. Property taxes goes up. That number is enough to cover that. And if the rent is like $200 higher, $300 higher by that time, this number is going to look even better.
Amazing. Right? So I mean, that pretty much wraps it all up for us. Elliot, are there any other sort of questions?
There are some questions.
We'll pick.
We'll pick a few.
Pick one or two that we'll get to. Yeah.
All right. People are asking how long can we expect a stable market? We think the market's going to kind of stay and be stable.
Yeah, I think Robert talked to that a little bit with. It's all about perception at this point and comfort with the market, right? Fundamentally, Canadians are able to afford the rates that we're at today. It's just going to take a bit of time, I think, for people to recognize that it's not going to drop back down to what it was. I think the message from Robert as well as from most big banks is that the sort of large leaps that we've seen, it's still going to continue, but it's going to really taper off. You're going to see banks, I think, taking a smaller spread. So interest rates, by most people, when you talk to Robert or anyone else, they kind of see them tapering off towards next year.
Yeah, and with rental numbers increasing and with less transactions and all the supply constraint, people are going to start feeling that.
Right.
And once people get comfortable, they start buying. They say, okay, you know, like.
But listen, as rents go up, ultimately it becomes more approachable for people to buy, right? It gets to a certain point where an individual will look at what they're paying on a monthly base to rent, and they're going to say, well, for this price, I might as well buy.
Yeah.
And once you hit that, then there's another run on purchase prices. So, you know, the market will constantly be in flux. But I think when you take a safe, a safe country like Canada, and when you take a stable, safe city like Toronto that has the employment opportunities that it has, that isn't tied to just one sector, right? Because we have finance, we have manufacturing, we have production, we have service industries, we have a wide breadth. You have the safety of, you have the safety of having multiple different opportunities in there.
Yeah.
And location.
Yeah, location. At the end of the day.
EXS, location. That's it.
Would Toronto's new inclusionary zoning affect the pre-construction pricing, and how would this affect the real estate market? What it's going to do is, we know that anything that's being imposed on the developers is always going to be passed on to the consumer.
Right.
And with having that in the city of Toronto, it's going to affect the prices. Like we talk a lot about, and I think it's really important that we differentiate between the resale market, which we've done, and pre-construction, because resale, we see these huge swings in people, and there are some people who've had to get out, and this economy has not been kind to them, and you hear about these massive declines in price. But in pre-construction, we have not seen any major discounting out there. We know for our developers and everybody that we work with, they paid the price for the land, the construction's in there. The trades all just got 3-year increases over the course of time, so those prices aren't coming down. Some commodity prices have fluctuated,
Sure.
wood, drywall, but they have stayed at a relatively high plateau, that these prices are not really going to change. So anybody looking for a massive real decline in pre-construction, and that's not going to happen.
But I think Robert even addressed it for pre-construction as well as for resale. There's no, he doesn't foresee any cliff in Canada that we're going to fall off of.
Yeah. We haven't seen a ton of defaults.
No. No, I think, and that goes to what Robert was speaking about, the stress test at the end of the day, right? Most Canadians have been tested at a higher rate, so they're able to handle these, increased rates that we're seeing today and the increased amounts.
And the rental numbers help people. If people need to, move out of their property, live with their parents, rent out the thing, there's multiple ways for people to deal with the default situations. So I think, as the individuals that over-leverage and bought like 10 condos with all the money they have, that guy will be in trouble. But most people, I think, been playing safe. And also, the pre-construction has allowed people time to plan for their financial situation.
Right.
So that's why we don't see much defaults at the moment.
No, and most people, we said stuff that's closing now, people bought at a significantly lower price. It's not replaceable. You just can't get back into the market, so people are moving in.
But back to EXS, I think the program that we have, it's basically taking care of all of that. Like anyone who, I think, is a first-time home buyer, a seasoned investor, anyone who's looking like a safe play, a positive cash flow, all of that, those are the fundamentals for you. I don't think any project is a good buyer. I would not recommend everyone to just go buy any project, but the one that ticking the boxes, it's something that you should consider.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
All right, well, we've got to our time. I want to thank everybody who's joined us here today. I hope you found it very informative. We loved having everybody around. Chris, Lewis, thanks for really hosting this, and Robert, who's not here, want to thank him for joining us. And any questions, you know how to find us, you know where to get us, text us, call us, we're here for you.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank you all the real estate agents that join us, as well as your clients. So if you have any questions, please contact your real estate agents, book an appointment, and then we'll be happy to answer all your questions.
Definitely.
So,
We'll see everyone soon.
All right,
Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.